Hi, I'm here today to talk about two of Hegel's most significant ideas. Two of the ideas I think that continue to have a lot to contribute to our way of thinking of ourselves, our understanding of ourselves, our understanding of human societies, of political life, of what it is to be a person, what it is to interact with other people, and so on. And those two ideas are the ideas of ethical life and of conscience. I think they're importantly related because they sort of appear to be in a certain kind of tension with each other. I think the tension is only apparent, but they're, Hegel's sort of nice way of observing one thing about the character of human experience, and then another thing about the character of human experience that are, in a sense, the two poles that we are constantly navigating, and constantly needing to own up to. Life is not just this one thing, and it's not just this other thing. So I won't exactly get into all the ways in which they're in tension and the ways they sort of balance each other out and so on. I just want to explain each one of them, and I'm sure that you could probably yourselves discern what kinds of relationships exist between them and so on, and how we navigate them in our practical lives. In any case, I think these are significant ideas for political reasons. They have a lot of political resonance, consequences for how we take up our living together, and they're significant ideas for personal reasons, and can deeply affect our self-understandings as well as our understanding of the character and the shape of our interaction with other people. So I hope that you'll see some of these things in the things that I'm going to talk about. Now, ethical life names, in a sense, the phenomenon of belonging and of membership. And it can be talked about in a sort of vague, broad level, and it can be talked about in a specific political sense. So I'm going to go from one to the other. And I want you to think about, I'm going to introduce the phenomenon of ethical life by having you think about the nature of family and the character of your upbringing. So imagine yourself again in the position of child. What you are when you're a baby, what you are when you're a child, is someone who doesn't yet have a sense of the independence of the other person, and you are someone who doesn't yet, in a sense, have sophisticated forms of behavior. Now, the issue is that you develop that behavior. You develop the capacity to interact with the world, the capacity to act, the capacity to think, to feel, to negotiate your feelings and your thoughts, to handle them, to interact with others, and so on. But you always develop that because of the attentions of other people. And those other people are not telling you and teaching you how everyone does this, how everyone speaks, acts, manages their emotions, interacts with the world, engages with other people, and so on. They're cultivating in you forms of behavior that they think are appropriate for the world, for engaging with the world, for engaging with other people, for engaging with your own body, for cultivating your own body, your own thoughts, your own feelings. So you learn how to be human. You gain the skills for engagement with reality from a specific set of caregivers, which means that you won't behave in a generic way. You will behave in a way that's deeply reflective of what those caregivers think is important, right? So you learn, these caregivers demonstrate to you, this is how we act when company comes over, right? This is how we use the bathroom. This is how we eat. This is how we deal with our feelings. These are the gestures that we make when we're speaking. This is the way we move our bodies. This is, the details are infinite, right? This is the volume that we use when we're communicating about a specific kind of thing. This is the tone that we use when we're talking about a specific kind of thing. So we are cultivated as human by a specific set of people. And presumably, in order to participate in the world that they open for us, we adopt the behaviors that they hand out to us as the appropriate behaviors. So if your parents, for instance, say, or your caregivers say, this is how you got to make sense in order to be understandable by us, you'll probably acquiesce, right? And adopt those modes of making sense. And, another thing to notice is that when you are a child, you're not in a position to see the thing that your caregivers are handing to you as one option among many, as an alternative, right? This is the thing that you are given, and it masquerades as the generic thing, like the way we act, the way people are, right? So what is presented to you as what is essentially a kind of option for your behavior is presented to you as though it were not an option. This is how things are done. So you're learning a particular orientation to the world, but you're not learning that it is only an option, an optional way of orienting oneself to the world, and there are other options. So the phenomenon of ethical life sort of captures that issue, that you're essentially a member. You belong somewhere. You are cultivated within a specific set of practices, and the specificity of those practices will never be fully apparent to you. The status they have is one among many. Now we can bring this notion of ethical life further, though. It doesn't just stay in the domain of the family. This phenomenon is much more widespread. Think about, for instance, what your educators do. They also hold out a specific way of understanding reality, specific methods by which to investigate reality, specific standards by which to evaluate whether something is true or not, and so on. They claim these are the texts and these are the events that are important, right? They claim these are the modes of interaction with reality that you have to undertake if you were to grapple with reality well. They claim these are the elements of human reality that you need to learn about. And it's not just going to be everything, right? It's going to be a very specific set of things that they hand to you. And similarly, think about your romantic relationships. Being involved with another person is, in a sense, being cultivated into a specific kind of orientation with the world, orientation to the world, where you start learning each other's habits, Another person might get really angry at a certain kind of thing that happens. And so you learn to navigate around that, right? To avoid the situation in which that person gets angry. And then you stop perhaps engaging in that thing that other person gets angry about because of their emotional reaction. Or, the person likes to do certain things, so you always do those things, and you stop engaging with another aspect of reality that you used to engage with because your partner doesn't like that, doesn't do that. So again, your interaction with the world is shaped by that other person. And in each of these things, like let's think of the educational environment and the adult or the romantic relationship. What you see inside of this specific experience of education is culture making itself manifest, right? It happens to be the case that you have gotten an education, most of you, I imagine, have gotten an education in the West. So that means that the self-understandings and the orientation to the world inhabited by other cultures or other regions in the world is not operative for you and is not made alive to you. So you might read this wonderful book called Destiny Disrupted, and I think the subtitle is something like A History of the World from a Muslim Point of View by Tamim Ansari, and you might be surprised, like, this was happening while the French Revolution was happening? I had no idea. How did I not know this? And it's because your educational system has implicitly adopted, sometimes not even self-consciously, a narrative of reality that is Eurocentric, that is Western-centric. So even beyond the educational context, there lies this like greater historical, cultural, political context that is informing, that is channeling through the educational context a specific kind of content. And similarly with the romantic relationship, the things that you do with another person are deeply marked by history, right? You go see a movie. Well, that's not what people used to do on a date, right? Or you drink alcohol at a bar, or you go to a restaurant, or you use a car or a streetcar or a taxi to get where you're going, and so on. These the media by which we enact our relationship are deeply culturally and historically specific. So, to show you the narrative of the thing that I'm saying, beyond the kind of specific ways in which we are cultivated by the other people around us, our families, our teachers, our romantic partners, and so on, is the larger social, historical, cultural, political context that itself provides the terms by which those smaller contexts, the terms in which those smaller contexts act, and provides the resources they have, provides the content, so to speak. So the point here is that, you would be different. You would live in a different family. You would have a different romantic relationship. You would be being taught different things if you inhabited a different historical era, a different culture, a different nation state, and so on, or a different polis in general. So the possibilities we have in our intimate, more closed, more local environments are deeply due themselves to the specificities of history and culture. So the basic point here is that your perspective and your experience and your sense of yourself and your sense of the world are profoundly shaped by other people, are invaded by other people, are constituted by other people. To be you is to be an interpersonal reality. You carry along with you all of these others, in a sense. So while you might think that your action is your own, there's a fundamental way in which it's not, right? You're enacting a larger context, carrying it out, actualizing that larger context in the world. You're enacting your parents' behavior. You're enacting your romantic partner's vision of the world. You're enacting your culture. Now, this means that what Hegel captures with the notion of ethical life is that who you are is fundamentally and irreducibly a member. You are defined by your belonging to interpersonal contexts that outstrip you in your individuality, that are bigger than you are. And Hegel, says the I is essentially a we, and that's what he's capturing here with the notion of ethical life. So that means that the idea that we're simply individuals or discrete, autonomous, independent, and so on, while it might be partially true, it's definitely only partially true, right? Because we are entrenched in these social systems, we develop the capacity to become individuals in the first place. So we are originally and essentially interpersonal. And the thing is, for you to be the being that you are, you needed that, right? You needed people to take you up and care for you, to pay attention to you, to show you a way of interacting with the world. So far from it being the case that other individuals are a kind of threat to your freedom, they're the condition of your freedom. The only way that you become competent, capable of interacting with the world and with other people, is by having been cared for by those other people. The only way you become capable of so many sophisticated forms of activity is by virtue of the resources for that activity having been cultivated by other people. So, think about the complex and rich ways in which other people are involved in your everyday action. Think about books, vaccines, mirrors, desks, chairs, lentils, Netflix, traffic lights, Picasso, all of those, these media by which we enact our own individual pursuits and by which we develop a kind of sense of the trajectory of our lives are accomplished by other people. So who we are is sort of a product of interpersonal relations, and all the stuff of our lives is a product of the free activity of other people. And this web, Hegel's just sort of giving the name ethical life to this web of involvements that in relation to which, or out of which, we can emerge, in a sense, as our own being, such that to be your own being is a product of the web and not, not a predecessor of it. Now, just to finish this account of ethical life, Hegel says in the Encyclopedia, The Philosophy of Mind, in paragraph 539, nothing has become more common than the idea that each of us must restrict our freedom in relation to the freedom of others, and the state is the condition in which this reciprocal restriction occurs, and the laws are the restrictions. In ideas of this sort, freedom is conceived only as contingent preference and willfulness. Given the things that I've just said, it seems nonsensical to construe other people as the kind of beings that restrict our freedom. The fact is, other people are the condition under which, in general, we have the lives that we have as individuals. The freedom of other people, their free activity, is something that allows for the resources that we have as individuals. This is, what I'm getting at in talking about these concrete sort of domains, the domain of family, the domain of education, the domain of romantic relationships, the domain of culture, the domain of history, the domain of society, and so on, is all the concrete, living, historical ways in which we see the practice of interpersonal interdependence at work, or the things that Hegel talks about in his discussion of recognition. This is recognition writ large. Self-consciousness exists only in being recognized. Self-consciousness is only self-consciousness insofar as it exists for a self-consciousness. We are fundamentally and originally interpersonal. So, as I sort of hinted at before, Hegel talks about ethical life in different ways. There are sort of more concrete, more specific ways of talking about it, and more general ways. In general, it names the human experience of belonging and of membership, where it is only on condition of belonging somewhere and of being recognized and of participating in a larger context beyond ourselves as individuals that we develop as human. But in other contexts, he talks about it in more concrete ways. Ethical life is the life of a system, sort of encompassing families or immediate circles of care, the system by which by which our labor and our independent pursuit of our own ends is organized, which he calls civil society, and the state, which reflects the sort of experience of togetherness that infiltrates every level of our existence. And there's the second thing to say, and that is conscience, right? And Hegel doesn't just assert this. He says, look, this is what you see. This is just what you see happening in human experience. To be a human being is also to have the experience of that belonging to these specific contexts doesn't decide everything. Like, you can be a faithful follower. You can be like a faithful member of your family, or a faithful member of your culture, or a faithful member of your religious group, and yet your action can't be automated. Your action is not automatic. We have to interpret the standards and the principles and the terms to which we have become accustomed. We have to figure out how to enact them in our situations, and that is because as human beings, we're always only in these specific finite situations, and you can never take a law or a norm or a custom and say and have it applied directly to a situation. Just doesn't. There's typically a big hole in the middle, and you have to figure out how to make it traverse that hole. So we can't just follow. We don't just follow. We might construe ourselves as just following our modes of ethical living, doing what our family wants, blah, 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 but we can't. So we get a sense of what is right and proper from our cultivation. And, our capacity to act well, to act correctly, to act properly is in fact deeply indebted to those contexts. Yet we are also inevitably thrown back upon our own judgment in acting in these contexts. So even if we want to just follow, we still have to figure out how. What does it mean to be a good mother? How do I have to act in order to be a good mother? What does it mean to be a good citizen? What is obedience? What does it mean to be a good colleague or a good employee, a good son? So Hegel raises the issue of conscience specifically in a consideration of morality. So he's talking about the experience of a sense of answerability to the good, right? Where what is on our mind is what we should do, how we should act. Again, while I may want to merely replicate the terms in which I live, terms by which I live, the familial, the religious, the cultural terms, it's not clear how I can do that in any given situation. What would it be to replicate them in this situation? And Hegel's point is basically you can't. In any case, the singular situation is in a sense an ungovernable situation. It's a situation to which the law or the principle or the norm, as I said, does not directly speak. And I and you are singular finite beings whose knowledge and capacity for judgment and action are going to be partial and reflect our singularity, our idiosyncrasy. So conscience is the experience that even in the context of these limitations, I have to do something. I want to do something in the mode of a kind of answerability to the good as such. So conscience is the kind of being who's grappling with the idea of, with the desirability of doing what is right, doing what is good. And in this context, conscience recognizes that it would be worse not to do anything, to refuse to respond to the good. So Hegel, in talking about this experience, puts it in a fictional form. He puts it in terms of two characters, the judge and the actor, in order to show the different dimensions of this experience. So, the actor acts, takes it upon herself to decide on something within this particular situation as a mode of answering to her desire to do the right thing. And the judge, Hegel says, rightly, in a sense, judges the act. What's operative in your action, actor, is a kind of one-sidedness. You acted according to your own interpretation of what the good required of you in this situation. You went beyond what the law requires because you needed to make it speak to this situation. You highlighted and you privileged your own insight, your own interpretation, your own interests. You are necessarily self-oriented, self-centered, not doing what is right. The judge essentially says, you can't take yourself out of the equation, and that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do the right thing and not the thing that you want, not the thing that you think is right. And that's right. That's correct to a certain extent. And the actor recognizes this. She says, okay, I confess. I acted in this one-sided way. I did what I thought was right. And in a sense, I put myself ahead of the good. I'm making myself the authority over the good by discerning what it requires in this particular situation. And I might be wrong. I might have done it poorly. Like my knowledge isn't perfect. My knowledge could never be thorough and complete. So she confesses, and again, rightly, right? She is one-sided. She is limited. She is just a perspective. She's not absolute. And she also recognizes and she expects that the judge will forgive her and that the judge will identify with her and that the judge's insight will help her in the future discern a better thing to do. So she, in a sense, confesses as a kind of invitation to this identification and this commonality. The possibility of communication about what would be the right thing to do. This is what she opens up with her gesture of confession, and she expects a response from the judge. And that, what she does there, is also deeply significant. If we don't have the absolute thoroughgoing guidance of the law, if we are inevitably dealing with our own partial perspective, then what is important is to get the support of other people and their insight to help us maybe, in a sense, make our knowledge, build our knowledge, right? Increase our knowledge, because what we have added to our own perspective then is another perspective that might develop in us the capacity to see things differently. So she, the agent, the actor, recognizes that establishing a context of communication among them is probably, between them, is probably a better way of getting to a better answer about what the good requires. And that gesture is really, it really resonates in a few different ways. We are essentially beings that are in this together, right? We require education from other people in order to become moral agents. We would benefit from understanding how our one-sided actions actually affect other people. And we are always finite judges. Like we don't see everything. We're not all-knowing, all-powerful. And communication might be a really good thing for showing us the meaning of our one-sided actions. So yeah, the judge refuses the context of communication, refuses the invitation. And Hegel's condemnation of the judge in this move is damning, right? This is the worst thing, it seems, that one could do. And so that's interesting that Hegel says, this is the biggest bad right here, the thing that the judge has done. But then the judge finally forgives, recognizing that, to not act is essentially worse than acting in a one-sided way. To refuse completely, the responsibility of acting, the judge just judges, doesn't do anything himself, is worse than, than involving oneself in a one-sided action. And judging is, in a sense, acting in any case. Not acting is acting. There's no way to evade acting. But in any case, what the judge in his forgiveness shows this, that action can never fully recognize the good or actualize the good. Action will always be one-sided. And yet action is the only vehicle through which any good will come into being. So what the judge affirms in his forgiveness is the necessity of one-sided action, the necessity of partial perspectives trying to get at something, to get something right. The forgiveness that the judge offers, finally, the agent, is a recognition of the absoluteness of partial one-sided relative action. That this is where we live. So we can discern a couple of things about action here. Our interpretations of what the good requires will always be finite and limited. They will always be fallible. We will always be involved with specific situations, so therefore not, pursuing what is good for every situation. And we will always be affiliated with one situation and therefore not with another, using our resources and energy on this situation and therefore not on others. We will always be fallible. But, on the other hand, embracing the necessity of acting anyway is an important way of acknowledging the authority of the good and not just of one's own insight and interests. Conscience is, in a sense, recognition of answerability to something other than ourselves. And finally, we can constitute contexts of communication that can help us do this better. And the constitution of those contexts of communication might be the most powerful way of answering to the impotence of the law on the one hand and the impotence of our own judgment on the other. So that's basically Hegel's analysis of conscience and the different aspects involved in undergoing moral action in the context of sort of impossibility of determination by the law, the good, etc. So here, with conscience and with ethical life, you get Hegel's sort of two-sided observation of the human condition. You are always a member. You can't evade membership. You can't evade the interpersonal roots of your own identity. You can't, in fact, ever even bring them to transparency. And you are always an individual in the sense that you could never perfectly replicate the worlds to which you belong. Human beings are always traditioned and always creative, always followers and always transgressors. And there is fundamental personal import in owning up to these two things in ourselves and in other people. And there's a kind of fundamental political import in owning up to these things in ourselves and our own societies and in other societies as well. So personally speaking, we have to own up to our status as members and our status as conscience, our potential status as conscience. We can kind of deny the demand for conscience in ourselves. And if we don't do those two things, we won't deal well with ourselves and we won't deal well with others. To own up to one's status as a member of specific interpersonal worlds is to recognize, without making it fully transparent, one's own specificity, and therefore to be able to grapple more honestly with the specificity of other people. But then to, own up to one's reality or potential to be conscience is to take responsibility, nevertheless, for enacting ourselves in our relationships in a way that knows that we couldn't perfectly just replicate, or do what we're supposed to do. And similarly, politically, this issue has profound significance. To own up to ethical life is to own up, in a sense, to the necessary specificity of any given social world, and the ways in which that specificity makes itself invisible, and in a sense has a kind of internal coherence that, means that if you're from one world, you won't be able to understand or grasp fully the meaningfulness and the resources available in another world. And yet, as owning up to conscience, to the reality of conscience within worlds, is reckoning with the fact that worlds are never simply self-replicating. And if they act like they are, then they're denying something fundamental about the nature of human beings. So I'm going to leave it there for now. A little mini lecture on Hegel's notion of ethical life and Hegel's notion of conscience, with some little gestures toward how those two things might be a kind of pairing that really makes a difference in our personal and social and political lives.